And his father would beat him if he caught Abraham Lincoln reading, his son reading, when he should have been out doing chores. And every chance Abraham Lincoln had to sort of shirk the chores for a while and read Aesop's fables or Shakespeare or the Bible, he'd do it. Tough, tough childhood. He loses the people who love him openly and are affectionate to him. And he keeps the man who doesn't like him as a person. Now it's true, I want to modify this just a little bit. Thomas Lincoln marries a wonderful woman, Sarah Bush Johnson, who becomes the stepmom, and she is a savior for him. She brings over her children into the cabin, but more importantly, she recognizes who Lincoln is as a person. She supports him, nurtures him in his desire to learn. And she had such interesting observations about him. She said, Lincoln, she said, young Abraham seems slow to a lot of people when you first meet him. He hasn't started telling his stories yet. But what he's really doing is he's listening to what you're saying, or he's reading, and he's processing things in his own way, and he will synthesize what he's learning in his own way, and he makes it his own. And that's how he becomes a great lawyer, through study and absorbing the facts, the insights he's getting, and making them his own. And this is why he became such a fierce debater in the Lincoln-Douglas debates. Lincoln had many, many obstacles to overcome. One little story about the ugliness, for example, since we're still on the interior here, is when he was debating Stephen Douglas, Douglas accused him of being two-faced. And Lincoln said to him, he said, now, Senator Douglas, if I really had two faces, why on earth would I ever put on this one? Lincoln experienced a very difficult love life, too. I mean, once he's out of the house, there are a lot of problems there, too. The love of his life, Anne Rutledge, dies also. And there's apparently this scene that you read about now. There's nothing really written about it directly, but there's a scene where he and Anne essentially say goodbye to each other when she is just about to die. He was so distraught over her death that he would throw himself on her grave when it rained because he couldn't stand the thought of rainwater going down into her grave site. This was a man who was considered so depressed by his friends like Joshua Speed. They took his knives away from him for fear that he would hurt himself. This was a man who was so depressed that when the Speed household took Abraham Lincoln in, Abraham Lincoln was flat on his back, depressed. Could not get out of bed. I mean, that's how depressed he was. Again, if you had taken a snapshot of this young man, just as you had, say, when he was a 9-year-old boy and when his mom died, now you take a snapshot of him even as a 25-year-old. This guy, who's so depressed, President of the United States someday? No way. No way. Lincoln had to overcome the ugliness, the depression. And it's been a source of a lot of conjecture. What was it that turned in him so that he was able to do that and become the person who mastered his interior life sufficient, was disciplined enough to do the things he had to do to be President of the United States? It's a remarkable journey for somebody who, again, starts out way down here. Way down here. We don't have time to go through it, but if you look also at Lincoln's years actually in the White House, and you look at the criticism, I would urge you to go out to this board out here that's by the Gilder Lehrman Institute, and go look at some of the political cartoons, and look at the scurrilous, the vicious political cartoons that were aimed at Lincoln. Dehumanizing. They called him ugly. They said he had a coconut head with the wiry hair, and there was a suggestion that maybe he was African, and all kinds of really nasty things attacking his very person. They were really vicious against Mary. They not only accused her of being a Southern sympathizer, But she liked to put a flower or two in her head, up here in her hair. They'd say, oh, she's very dumpy. And the cut of her dresses is way too low. And why on earth does she wear a flower bed on top of her head? That's how vicious. These are cartoons. These are the things that are actually out there. We think elections are nasty today. No way. No way. Our elections today cannot compare to what they were like back in 1864, 1860, or even if you go back to the founders, and if you go back to, say 1792, 1796, 1800. Vicious, vicious elections. This is when politics really was blood sport. We had, remember, the Vice President of the United States go out and shoot and murder the former Treasury Secretary. Politics was so much more interesting then. What would a 24/7 news cycle do without it? Oh, excuse me. Yeah, Cheney did go out and shoot. Forgot about that. Anyway, these were all the obstacles Lincoln overcame to get into the White House, and then he had to have nerves of steel to stay in the White House. And you probably know the stories. Little Willie, 11-year-old little Willie, died when he was in the White House. He died on a Thursday. It was February 20th, 1862. That was a Thursday that year. Every Thursday, until the end of his life, 3 years later, Lincoln would take a half hour and he would just go into little Willie's room and he'd just mourn. He'd weep. No, he would sob. Weeping is just tears. Sobbing, your shoulders. Sob. Very, very tragic life. And yet he had this inner strength to overcome all of those obstacles, to become consistently one of the 3 greatest presidents in U.S. history. Consistently right. Now, I promised at the very beginning of this talk that we would also talk about the Gettysburg Address. Let me just go over it very, very quickly with you because, well, we could do this one of 2 ways, Lisa. Do you want me to open it up to Q&A now and make this optional, or do you want me just to go through the Gettysburg Address? It's up to you.
Let's do the Gettysburg Address.
Okay. Sir, would you pass that along? Would you pass that along, please? Thank you. It's all of a piece, isn't it? Abraham Lincoln overcomes all of these obstacles to get where he goes. He rises higher than maybe any other human being thus far to become President of the United States. When you consider all of those obstacles, the geographic isolation, the lack of formal schooling and the educational credentials, you look at the lack of a political influence, no inherited wealth, you look at his ugliness, you look at his internal struggles, his depression. He rises higher to get to the White House than anybody else. What is the message there? The message is, if I can do it, anyone can do it. Abraham Lincoln was very aware of the challenges he had to overcome. Now, this is what makes the Gettysburg Address such an interesting document. I just want to go over a few things in the address with you. Because you're going to see how it fits together with Lincoln's very biography. If you look at the Gettysburg Address, he begins it, for a guy who wasn't religious most of his life, he begins it 77 years ago. Now, remember, this is 1863. What had just happened? Robert E. Lee and the Confederates had come up for one last desperate effort to invade the North and threaten Washington City, which is what they call it then, Washington City from the north. All they had to do was the same thing that George Washington had done in the Revolutionary War, and that's just get the North, which he couldn't beat on the battlefield ultimately, but just to say, enough already. It's okay for the South to secede.